Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anarita Bashaliva, along with co-hosts Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Shrey. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post any questions for our guests. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Professor Katerina Shrek.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким поклоном після ще одного болісного тижня на вашій землі. Дякуємо вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you. And today's guest will be introduced by Professor Victor Fett. Please turn off your cameras and we are ready.
Hello, everyone. I'm Victor Fett at Marshall University, and it is my pleasure to introduce today Marina Tyurina Oberlander from Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, we do not have live video connection. We'll work through audio, and still picture of Marina will be available. She is with us. Marina is a poet, writer, and well-known translator of Scandinavian and English prose and poetry into Russian. She was born in St. Petersburg, formerly Leningrad, into the family of world-renowned soil scientist Ivan Tyurin. Marina holds master's degree in philology from Moscow State University. She authored 4 original books of prose and poetry, 3 in Russian and 1 in English, translated into Russian from Danish and English, has numerous publications in prestigious literary journals. She lives in Washington, D.C. for more than 20 years, and recently she became a member of the editorial board of a Russian language international journal, VREMENA, or The Times, which is published in Boston, Massachusetts. And today she agreed to talk to us about the current situation, of course, within the context of the war in Ukraine, about the role of printed journals in literature in general, in Russian-speaking expatriate community in America and elsewhere. Please, Marina, we welcome you to Ukraine podcast.
Well, thank you so much. It's the first time when I'm speaking to a mute phone, to a phone without any pictures. But anyway, I will try to do it. I like to see the faces. I like to see the auditorium. And I prepared a few, journals to show, and it's of course a pity that I won't be able to. But you can see these journals on the net. If you go on the site of M Graphics in Boston, you will see the beautiful journals that we publish since 2017. So this is the 7th year of our publication. Before this journal was called, it had a different name and was published for 10 years, since 2007 till 2017. But then the publisher, closed it, and our editor-in-chief found a new publisher, and of course we started to publish this journal under a different name. We chose the name VREMENA because there is a famous, one of the lines in the poem of one of the very, very well-known poets in Russian, that you cannot choose the times. You live in these times, and you pass away in these times. So we decided to have it as VREMENA, and now I am on editorial board, and I am actually doing the editing together with our editor-in-chief. His main mission is to choose the texts, and my main mission is to evaluate them and correct. So we have a very nice, team, and we work on it with great pleasure. But before our journal is becoming more popular with the years, because we try to. So the mission of our journal is to publish very first of all, good literature. We publish prose, we publish fiction, we publish, prose fiction, we publish prose, all kinds of history, memoirs, also polemics when people, disputes, poetry, and of course humor. So everything that is interesting, we try to put into our journal. It is pretty thick; it's 300 pages, and it comes out quarterly. So the history, actually, why, from my point of view, thick literary journals are very useful. They are needed by people. You see, this tradition actually started in the 19th century, when some of Russian philosophers and writers couldn't even live in Russia. It was even, and some of them preferred to live abroad. But they published things in their journals. They created journals. One of them was called Kolokol, a bell, that was published in France. And France was actually a very popular place for Russians to go. And there were a lot of expats living there. So this journal became very popular also in Russia, because there were materials that couldn't be published in Tsarist Russia. The same thing actually happened after the so-called Great October Socialist Revolution, which was actually a simple coup d'etat. A lot of people left Russia after it. They couldn't live with Bolsheviks, and some of them Bolsheviks actually expelled. The first big expel from Russia was so-called philosopher's ship, where 200 best, I would say, minds of Russia, philosophers and writers that were philosophers, also scientists, were put on a ship and shipped away from the new Soviet Republic. So, of course, these expats, a lot of people went to Siberia, and then with the spread of the communist regime, Bolshevik regime in Russia, they moved to China, and then to United States, and then also there was another flow that went to the Caucasus, which was independent at that time. Later in 1921, Bolsheviks took the Caucasus, all the Caucasian republics, Georgia and Armenia and Azerbaijan. And a lot of them, a lot of Russian, also intelligentsia, so-called intelligentsia, flew to Europe. And there were three major centers. Actually, Prague wasn't that famous, but Berlin, of course, and Paris. So a lot of writers, poets, artists settled. Some of them settled in Berlin, some of them settled in Paris. And in 1920, the first thick journal that was called "Современные записки." If I translate it into English, it's modern notes or modern sketches. So they published people. There were a lot of writers, and they started to publish their, literature, their poetry, and their fiction, and their essays, and whatever. They started to publish in this journal. This journal was very popular, and it existed till 1940, until the occupation of France. In 1942, those writers who actually managed to escape to United States, to New York, in 1942, they established a new, they didn't want to call it the same name, so they called it New, the New Review. The New Review, in Russian, it is called Новое время. This is the oldest Russian, the oldest journal published in Russian in United States. Is published in New York. Very prestigious. To be published in this journal is very prestigious because it is, established old journal. But it is very expensive, and in comparison with the edition that was in France, they had, their edition was about 2,000 copies. And this New Review, the New Review in 2017 had about 120. But still it exists, and people and writers, the expats of that live in the United States, and not only in the United States, also European expats published their works there. But of course, one journal wasn't enough, and other journals started to evolve. And for example, I would say that, for example, in Germany, there are 11 journals that are published in Russian. The most famous are Bridges, Mosty, and Литературный европеец, which is literary European. These are the most prestigious, and they also publish yearly books of poetry, collections of poetry that, accumulate during the year. So it is also very interesting. In the United States, there is, I won't speak about all of them, but there are a few thick journals, and ours is, developing the audience, because from my point of view, it has very good quality. So we publish authors that cannot be published in Russia. The writers who live in Russia now and cannot be published there because their points of view do not match points of view of Russian establishment. And of course, we publish poetry, and there are a lot of expats, because the first wave of expats was after the revolution. The second wave was in the 70s, when Russian Jews, Jews that lived in Russia, were allowed to emigrate in exchange for wheat that Soviet Union bought from United States. So it was called wheat emigration. And then after the break of the Soviet Union, and before actually the break of the Soviet Union in '89, the people who were waiting for to emigrate, because not everybody could manage to do it before '79 when the doors closed. So in '89, the doors opened again. So there was the third flow that continues up to now, because it is informal figure. No, it was never published, but people say that according to the loss of Russian population in the last 20 years under Putin, about 20 million people from the former Soviet Union, from Russia, especially from Russia, emigrated from Russia, not being comfortable living there. Now, you know that Bolshevik terror in the 20s and in the 30s, and after the war, you know about Gulag that, you know, killed a lot of people. And so the losses during the war were not only from the war itself, but also from people who died in the Gulag. And now a lot of people are arrested on just absolutely fake accusations. And of course, a lot of people leave. So the fake journals have a certain, you know, sign that Russian literature, I would say Russian literature written in Russian language, because a lot of people from the former Soviet Union tried to write in Russian so they would be published. Because if they wrote in their own languages, of course they did, but they were published and read only in their countries, in their areas. For example, Soviet Union had 15 republics, and of course, people living in, for example, in Kazakhstan, in Georgia, they spoke their languages, but the Russian language was the language, the state language. And of course, if you wanted to become known, to develop a name, a literary name, you had to write in Russian or being translated into Russian by Russian translators. So these Russian, I will say Russian journals that exist now in Europe, in United States, even in Australia, they form a certain circle around them, a certain circle of authors that have that think in like I would say not completely the same, but at least their minds are clear and they can discuss. They don't have always the same attitude towards the events that are happening in the world. They can dispute it. For example, when there was coronavirus, there were articles we published articles that were written from different points of view. For example, there were supporters of people who didn't want to vaccinate. There were supporters of vaccination, and they were trying to find a solution, how to deal with it. So it was pretty interesting. Our journal in the times of COVID, during the pandemic, became even more popular because we didn't prevent people to express their attitude towards the pandemic. But of course, with the war in Ukraine, it is absolutely different. We won't publish materials that support Russian aggression. We support Ukraine. That was our, motto. When the war started in February, our first issue of 2022 was already in the printing house. And the only thing that we could do, we could we could do a cover. We could change our cover a little bit. And our cover is actually very simple. It's just different colors and the word VREMENA published in very, printed in very big letters across, on a diagonal across the first page of the first cover. And we did, you know, like a head of, we cut the head of it and we put the word war. Putin is destroying Ukraine. Starting, we couldn't put any materials, of course, any you know, poetry or anything written about the war, because the war just started. We didn't have, of course, especially poetry started to pour into our you know, bag of our journal, because poets, they started immediately reacting to the war. And in the second issue, we also on the cover we wrote, Ukraine, we are with you in your struggle. So in the second issue, we started already to publish materials that were, you know, written about war in Ukraine. The first one was very, mainly it was documentary. It was the first publication that opened the second issue, was written by Galina Itskovich. Galina Itskovich is a New Yorker. She is a psychologist, and she spent a lot of time working with victims in Ukraine that were traumatized by the war. And it was, of course, a very difficult job. And she wrote a diary. It is actually a very, you know, I think it's a great thing to write a diary. Unfortunately, this, you know, genre is almost disappeared in literature, but she is one of those who, you know, like took it out. Because, of course, to write fiction, for example, during the war, it's practically impossible. So she wrote a diary, and she just put all the facts that she learned from the people who spoke to her, who told her stories, what happened to them. It's just, when I read this diary, we published the first 2 months of the war, so 60 days. 60 days, short, sometimes short excerpts, sometimes it is a little bit longer. One story was just absolutely terrible. It was about it was, you know, of course, the massacre in Bucha, and it is an outskirt of Kiev on the north. There are a few outskirts, very nice. It's very old. Actually, my grandmother's sister lived in Bucha since the beginning of the century, since she was born. And her family, her granddaughter, lives there now. So she's my second cousin. And she's a professor at Kiev University, and her husband is a doctor of philology, specialist in Polish language, translator also. They live in Bucha. So when she told me what happened in Bucha, when I learned what was happening in Bucha, I couldn't get in touch with them. It was awful because we didn't know what happened to them. They didn't have internet, they didn't have phone, they didn't have anything. So at last she wrote to my daughter because she could connect with her in Georgia, and she wrote that they actually were lucky because their house was very far, and the racists, you know, they're called racists, like fascists. So they didn't reach that part of Bucha, but they didn't have electricity, they didn't have heating, they didn't have anything. And they had to, and they didn't have a fireplace in their home, so they went to cook something to their neighbors who had. And when the racists left, they went, you know, to look what was there, and it was awful. It was awful. People, kids, you know, were lying dead on the streets. Raped women were lying dead. That were, you know, to describe it, you can see it on the pictures. The pictures of what happened in Bucha, and not only in Bucha, in Irpin, in Brovary, in the neighborhoods. It was completely terrible. Of course, Russia's administration, including Putin, tried to cover it and say that Ukrainian fascists killed these people. They are fascists. We have to free this country. And it was very, very, very sad, and it's continuing. It's continuing because when Ukrainians free a place that was occupied by Russians, they see what damage. You know, infrastructure is one thing, but another thing is people. And if you, well, next I will just tell you a little bit about other publications, so you will understand it better about the reasons and everything. So in the second issue, we also published 20 poems of different authors that were written, you know, on the topic of war. It was just a cry. It was just a cry. Because of course poets who live, you know, Russian speaking, and they are all supporting Ukraine, and their hearts are bleeding because a lot of them have actually, if they don't have family there, they have friends. For example, Victor knows we have a friend, Gary Light, who lives in Chicago. He was born in Kiev and he went to school in Kiev. His family immigrated when he was 12 years old. And of course he has his classmates and he still has ties with them. So of course we call. I have my best friend lives in Kiev. She's professor at Kiev University, and she is a specialist in literature. And she was telling me what was happening with literature, because now the whole bunch of Russian classics is thrown out of the school program and of university program. And although her heart is bleeding because she dedicated her life to literature and to maintaining it and to promoting it to her students and everything, but she said, I understand, because these Russians, when they come, they destroy Ukrainian heritage. They, you know, shot at the monument to Taras Shevchenko. Taras Shevchenko is like Pushkin in Russia. It's like Shakespeare in England. It is a national treasure. So they destroyed it. They destroyed the museum of the famous, he is actually world famous philosopher, Grigory Skovoroda, who was Ukrainian, they destroyed the museum. They tried to burn another museum. So this is going on and on. They are destroying not only infrastructure, not only cultural heritage, but they are destroying population. And this is total genocide. One genocide that happened in the 30s when there was so-called Holodomor from the word hunger. So people died from hunger, and it was artificial hunger, constructed by Stalin and his, his buddies to destroy Ukrainians, because Ukrainian nation, because Ukrainians were always freedom fighters, and they couldn't accept the rule of Bolsheviks. Actually, a lot of former Soviet republics, they immediately declared independence when Soviet Union fell. Collapsed because they didn't want to be with Russia in one company, because they knew what this regime brings. Of course, there were some hopes in the 90s when Yeltsin was at power, but he couldn't fight the mafia. I'm saying it, the KGB mafia. So as a result, Putin came to power, and you cannot change KGB people. It's a bunch of criminals. It's a bunch of criminals, and they behave like criminals, and as always, and they have no mercy. They have no compassion for people at all. In the third, I said already. In the third, what we had, it was Galina Iskovich. In the fourth one, very interesting. Very interesting. Also, it was like a diary. It was written by a Russian paratrooper who was taken to the war. He wasn't mobilized. He was a contractor. He was in the army already as a contractor, and he was sent to Ukraine. And eventually, he started to hate the war and he understood what this war was about, and he left. He emigrated. He left the army, and he went. I think he went to France, and now he's seeking for French, for asylum in France. So he sent his diary. And his diary is very interesting, and I will tell you why, and I will compare it to another publication that just came out 3 days ago in the first issue of our journal, written by Ukrainian. So this guy, the Russian one, wrote about his first, impressions about what was going on, was accusation of the army command, how everything was organized. So they didn't have equipment, they didn't have enough food, they didn't have this, they didn't have that, and they didn't know where they were taken and what are they supposed to do. So when they actually found out what they were supposed to do, they were told that they have to fight Ukrainian fascists. They didn't meet Ukrainian fascists when they were fighting. They actually came from Crimea, so they went to Kherson region, to the southern part of Ukraine. And they didn't in the southern part. Maybe like in every country, there may be some fascists, and there may be some fascists in the Western Ukraine. But like in St. Petersburg in Russia, there is a fascist organization. So you can find maybe one or two. But in the southern part, in the eastern part of Ukraine, there are no fascists at all. And even because this area is mainly speaks Russian, because it's on the border with Russia. For example, Kharkov area is oblast. In Russian it's called oblast, but it's an area. It's an area around the city, a pretty big one. It has a big border with Russia, and there are a lot of Russian-speaking people, because especially in those areas that are close to the border, a lot of people, they communicated. They moved from one place to another, from Russia to Ukraine, from Ukraine to Russia, and there are a lot of families that are mixed. For example, my father was Russian, my mother was Ukrainian, and I have more Ukrainian relatives than Russian, because my father didn't have that many brothers and sisters, only one sister and 3 brothers, and my grandmother had had 9, and my grandfather had 5. So can you imagine what amount of offsprings came from those families? And I communicate with a lot of them. Not only I communicate with my friends, because I spent my childhood in Ukraine. So he didn't find any fascists. So they were told to kill people. Why do we need to kill people? If we see, if we fight, that's one thing. But why do we need to kill civilians? No, they were told you have to, and he saw that all this propaganda was going through, and a lot of his soldiers that surrounded him, paratroopers and others, they were raping, they were killing, they were doing just awful things. And finally he came to a conclusion that what is the goal of this war? Why did Russia invade Ukraine? What was the reason? Invaded an independent country that wasn't a threat to Russia. Ukrainians didn't attack Russia. Russia attacked Ukraine. So, and then he said, if they wanted to invade this territory and absorb it, because they said that Ukraine is a non-existing country. That is the main point of Russia's propaganda, that Ukraine is not existing country. If they want to invade and they want to absorb it, why do you bomb it? Why do you start your invasion with artillery bombing? Why? Don't you understand that you will have, that these people will hate you, that they will fight with you for their independence? So finally, he came to a conclusion that this is not a right thing, and he left. And of course, he had to hide, and then he sent his diary to our editor-in-chief, found the site, and we published it. And also there were a bunch of very good poetry. That there is a very good Ukrainian poet who writes in Russian, but he lives in Jerusalem, and he's a very satirical. He writes such satire on what is going on in Russia and elsewhere in the world, and he wrote very, very very good poems about what is happening in Ukraine. So we published him in the fourth issue, and in the first issue, this will be my last, thing to say. So we have an absolutely wonderful article written by also a Russian writing Ukrainian writer, a pretty young one. He was born in '67, Alexei Nikitin, and he wrote a very good analysis of why Putin invaded Ukraine, what were the reasons, and he actually explained that what Russia is now, it is a fascist state, and it started to develop when Putin came to power. He refers to the work of Umberto Eco about fascism that gave 14 features of fascism. And he says that all of them may be applied to the state, that it is a terrorist state, and that what is going on in Ukraine, it is a policy of genocide, because Putin's goal is to destroy Ukraine and Ukrainian people as a nation. So this is he's absolutely brilliant. I won't tell you a lot about this. I want to tell you a little bit. My friend Natalia, who lives in Kiev and is professor at the university, she wrote me a wonderful letter about what was going in the university, how this literature program of literature that was developed after because Russian literature went into the category of foreign literature. So Ukrainian was national, and Russian literature was in the same package of foreign literature, part of foreign literature. So there was English literature, American, French, blah blah, and Russian. And of course, Russia can be proud of her writers like Dostoevsky, like Tolstoy, like Pushkin, Bulgakov, and so there were masterpieces of Russian literature in the program. So now there are two left. There were about, I think she told me about 25, so two left. One book written by Bulgakov, which is called Dog's Heart, or A Heart of the Dog. It is translated into English. Brilliant, story. And another one, pretty satirical story written in the 30s about, I would say, about corruption in Russia in the 30s. It is very, very funny, but very deep. But why only these two were left, nobody knows. At the same time, the statue of Bulgakov that was in Kiev on the street where he was born and where he lived till he was about 20 or something, and studied and wrote novels about Kiev and what was happening in Kiev and in Ukraine when Ukraine was independent for 3 years. For 2 years. For 2 years, and those were thrown away, and his monument was destroyed. The monument of Pushkin was destroyed. Some others were taken off. It is interesting that she, although her heart is bleeding for literature and for history of literature, she says this is inevitable because what Russians are doing in Ukraine, it is absolutely unbelievable. Two, I will tell you a few facts that she wrote that I learned. So the territory, which is equal to the territory of two Austria, if you take Austria and multiply it by 2, that is the territory in Ukraine which is covered with mines. There are mines everywhere. So if Russians are, going back, they are putting mines. Especially, this is just like a work of devil, because they are mining corpses of children. They are mining corpses of other, women, civilians that are left behind. So people start to collect them, at least to bury them, and they are blown by these mines. They are mining forests. Some people went to collect mushrooms or berries or whatever, and they were blown. Although people are warned, don't do it. Don't do it because you will be damaged. But some people don't believe. And but of course this has to end, and Ukraine has. This is why it is so important that Ukraine will be Ukrainian victory, that it gains victory, because to leave Russia, a fascist country, on the territory of Europe and Asia, it is to have the fire burning on our globe. We have to get rid of fascism. Like fascism in Germany was destroyed in 1945, and it took years and years to for Germans to understand what happened, and to go through a process of confession. But in Russia, after Soviet Union was collapsed, this didn't happen, because communism, which I can put on one platform with fascists, wasn't. There was no trial, like a trial in Nuremberg after the Second World War. There was no trial of communism. Communism wasn't, destroyed like ideology, and of course, because it stayed, it remained, fascism grew on its, place. So we have to help Ukraine as much as we can. And actually, this war would have never happened if Putin was stopped in the beginning when he invaded Georgia. And when 20% of Georgian territory is taken. And when Putin went to Donbass and Crimea in 2014, he wasn't stopped, like Hitler wasn't stopped in the beginning. They let him occupy half of Europe, and only then the West started to wake up. I hope that now, when situation is critical, I think that we all have to support Ukraine, because we have to eliminate Putin's regime. That's it. Thank you very much. Hello?
Yes, Marina, we are here, and
You are
we are
here?
absolutely,
My,
we're absolutely grateful to your
my screen
wonderful.
is black.
We're absolutely grateful to your wonderful talk, and I'm sure that others have comments and questions. Please, the panel and the listeners.
Okay, you will have to.
We have a question in the chat from Carol Smith. Marina, thank you so much for this. Do you think that Putin has plans for genocide beyond Ukraine? In other words, is his a particular hatred specifically for Ukraine only, or does it include countries beyond Ukraine?
It includes the countries beyond Ukraine, because his obsession is to restore the Soviet Union in its and not only in its borders but beyond.
Thank you. Thank you.
His second, I think his first attempt was Georgia, and I think that Georgia is still on the on the table. And but his next goal after Ukraine would be Moldova, to cut and he doesn't cover it. He says that Moldova has to be taken because Belarus is like a country between him and the West, and Moldova is another one. So Ukraine and Moldova have to be occupied.
It's so frustrating to see what's going to happen. And yet it's being helpless or not being helpless, but just
the main thing is that finally Europe is waking up, because they realize that they will be next.
Yeah. We have a second question in the chat, also from Carol, and it's this. Is literature published in Russian that doesn't match the current regime's thinking a purposeful political act of resistance, or is it more simply a need to publish creative expression regardless of political implications?
No, we publish literature that is not connected with politics. For example, we published, we are just started publishing a very interesting novel that is called Transition, about transgenders. And in the previous issues, we published a novel about the events that happened in the 20s and 30s in the Soviet Union. And it is very interesting because the focus is completely different. And of course, we publish a lot of poetry that sometimes is politically oriented and sometimes not. Sometimes it's just about love.
Let's go back to the Georgia question. Not Georgia. Can you educate our listeners a little bit about what happened in Georgia? I know our focus is on Ukraine, but that is a really important historical moment. Can you just quickly educate us?
Yeah. The thing is that so after the break of the Soviet Union, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was practically all republics, former republics of the Soviet Union, and as I said, there were 15. They declared independence. Russia very quickly made a tie with Belarus. But Georgia, Caucasian republics were independent, and after a short turmoil with, there was actually a war inside Georgia in the 90s because there were different, there are a few, there are not only Georgians living in Georgia. There are also Ossetians, and there are some others. But there were clashes between different political clans. And there was one, the first president, was kicked out very quickly, the second as well. And then finally, Saakashvili came to power. Mikhail Saakashvili was the third president of Georgia. And he started, Georgia was a very poor country. And of course, Russia also, in the very beginning, when republics declared independence, Georgia has two autonomous republics in its on the territory. So they are under the big government of Georgia, but they have their municipal governments, autonomous republics, like Chechnya in Russia and other. There are small Tatar, for example, republic is autonomous republic. It's not independent republic. So Abkhazia was very easily taken by, it was I think it is one of the best places in Georgia, very fertile, and it's on the bank of the Black Sea, and it was a resort. It was a republic of resorts on the Black Sea, and all Russian elite went to the Khrushchev's dacha was there. Putin has his dacha there. So the people in Abkhazia were just given Russian passports. And Abkhazian, municipal autonomous republic government started to deal with Russia more than with Georgia. So they said that they will be independent, but nobody, of course, recognized it as independence, only Russia. And it's like a satellite of Russia. It's very poor, and Russia doesn't invest into it money at all. Only into dachas of Putin, which he has, I think, 3 in Abkhazia, or 4. So the other one, Adjaria, which is closer to Turkey, also has ports and beautiful beaches. It remained in the it was included they didn't declare independence. They stayed with Georgia. So Saakashvili he's actually from Batumi, from Adjaria, and his first goal was to develop Georgia, to get rid of corruption, and to make it flourish. And in his 10 years of presidency, he achieved a lot. First of all, he kicked out all old, police. He hired new policemen. He built a house that is called the House of Justice, where you can come and you can do any how do you say it in English? So you can sell a house, you can buy a house, you can buy property, you can sell a car, you can do whatever, any legal action could be done in 15 minutes.
Wow.
So so he got rid of corruption. The economy started to develop, and investments went from the west into Georgia. Georgia is such a beautiful country, so a lot of tourists poured into Georgia. They started to build beautiful hotels. They started to build beautiful resorts. They started to build roads. So in 10 years, Georgia not completely, but changed a lot. Of course, Putin didn't like it. So when Saakashvili's term ended, I don't remember, it was 10 years or 8 years, what term they had, 4 or 5 years. Putin sent his buddy, Bidzina Ivanishvili, who was a Georgian, but he was a Russian oligarch. So Putin sent him to Georgia and said, you take the power. So Bidzina went there and said, I will do this, I will do that, I am a rich man, blah, 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 blah. So blah, 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 he became president. He became president, built himself a beautiful castle, a beautiful mansion. He didn't want to stay to sit in the president's home, so he built himself a beautiful mansion, and he started to pour money only into things that he thought would impress people. So the first thing he did, he built a huge Orthodox church. Georgians are Orthodox. They are not Russian Orthodox, but they are Orthodox. They have their own Georgian church, like in Armenia as well. So he built a beautiful, huge Orthodox church. That was the first one. Then he built something else. Then he built a dendrarium. He built a beautiful botanic garden on the shore, on the seashore. The trees were shipped even from South America. Can you imagine how much money he has? It was all done by his money. But that was what he was doing. Nothing else was developed. Nothing else was developed. A few years after he came to power, he was doing some things, and so he could stay for another term. And then he stopped doing anything. So now there is another prime minister, there is a president, which is a puppet. All the power was taken from her. The political, the political system was completely changed, because now it is not a presidential, not the president is the head, but prime minister is the head. So it's a parliamentarian republic. And of course, there was opposition. Saakashvili was accused of murder, of something else, and he was kicked out. He went to Ukraine. Actually, he stayed in Ukraine for a long time. And 2 years ago, during the last, when there was election of a new president, he came back. He came back. He was smuggled into Ukraine, into Georgia, on a ship, and he on a cargo ship, because he thought that his party was going to win, and he was, he came like he worked for actually for Zelensky's administration. He was his advisor. But in 2008, Putin decided to invade Georgia, and he invaded, and he actually grabbed a piece of Georgia, which is 20% of Georgian territory, and his tanks were. Georgia didn't have an army practically. Very, very small, very small. It couldn't fight with Russian army. But so what Saakashvili did, he called George Bush, who was president at that time in 2008, and he said, George, if you don't do anything, they will be in Tbilisi tomorrow. So George Bush sent an air carrier into the Black Sea. And this air carrier with, aircrafts, huge one, came and embarked by Georgia's shore. And immediately the invasion was stopped, and Putin took his, called his army back, but the territory that they grabbed remained in their hands. So Georgia lost 20% of the territory. And of course they want it back. And then Putin invaded Ukraine in 2014. First, he grabbed Crimea practically without any shooting. Well, at that time, the president in Ukraine was a different guy. He was Putin's guy, so he let it go. And then when he fled, Yanukovych, when he fled, Putin went into Donbass. My two cousins, younger cousins, they live in Donetsk, and they told me exactly what was happening there and how Donbass was taken. But it's another story. It is a long story, so I won't keep you that much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for putting a little historical context to that. Thank you very much. And Victor, I'm going to toss it back over to you.
Thank you, Katerina. Do we have more questions from our panel or viewers, please? While they're thinking, Marina, I believe that I need to commend you on this wonderful and deep talk. And we have been, we know each other for a long time. We have been on many panels and conferences. Marina is a constant contributor to our literary collections. And we know we are here for a long time already, but I must ask Marina to read us a couple of her poems because she writes in English and translates her poetry into English as well. And we will conclude with this if we don't have more questions. Please, Marina.
Okay. I will write. I published a book. I will tell because I cannot show it. In 2020, I published a book of my original poetry and translations of my poetry, and it is called "I Simply Have to Fall in Love." This is my actually motto of my life because, for example, Dostoevsky said that beauty will save the world. Solzhenitsyn said that kindness will save the world, and I say that love will save the world. If we, if we learn to love, then the world will be absolutely different. Both kindness and beauty, they are absorbed by the notion love. So my book is called "I Simply Have to Fall in Love," and this was actually the first poem I wrote in English. Just 1 second. Okay. I simply have to fall in love with something or somebody. It may be cloud, it may be dove, a soul or a body, a twinkling star in stormy night, a tender voice from heaven, a touch of blessing in twilight when poems pour in 7, a sheet of paper, blank and white, which I will stain with letters, or my next dream, which brings delight, and that is all that matters. So this is the first one, and the second one you will understand when I come to the end. Today it rains again. I search for sun in vain. Should I complain? Impossible. The rain won't stop. Even if you pray, is it his gain? He mocks me. His power is strong. He welcomes me to walking in his might, to make me wet and thus forget the sorrows. He is right. He washes off the layers of regret that I have met, and what's ahead? The light.
Wow.
Thank you very much, Marina. We enjoyed it profoundly, and thanks everyone for being with us. Katerina, please give greetings to our Ukrainian viewers as we do.
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас все в наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці і до наступного тижня прощаємося.
Вітаю усіх. Вітаю усіх. До побачення, до перемоги. Слава Україні!
Героям слава. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.